Hello and welcome to Newsmax Now on this Memorial Day.
Thank you for being with us. We're spending some time today on this day of reflection and remembrance for those who died while serving our country. Throughout the day here on Newsmax TV, we'll be checking in on events around the world to honor the bravest men and women from generations past and present.
And good afternoon and welcome back to this Memorial Day edition of Newsmax Now.
It's good to have everybody with us for yet another hour. And there was a bomb scare on Capitol Hill near the site of that Memorial Day concert last night. We'll have more on that in a second. But first, we turn our attention now to two U.S. fighter jets escorting an Air France plane safely to JFK Airport after an anonymous bomb threat was made against that flight.
Yeah, that flight 22, arrived safely at JFK Airport in New York, where it was moved to a secure area for a search. That, according to ABC News, Maryland State Police received the bomb threat early this morning. The FBI is now handling that investigation into the threat.
Now, an update on that bomb scare yesterday at the U.S. Capitol. The bomb squad in Washington, D.C. detonated a pressure cooker found in a car on the National Mall not far from the U.S. Capitol. That vehicle was spotted during a patrol yesterday afternoon. You might hear the blast here in a second. Prior to that concert last night, investigators later said there was nothing hazardous inside the car, and you see that technician there working near that car. That pressure cooker bomb wasn't actually a bomb, but pressure cooker bombs were used, of course, in the Boston Marathon attack.
And throughout this Memorial Day holiday, we're thanking the men and women who paid the ultimate sacrifice while serving our country.
There is nothing more profoundly American than Memorial Day. Throughout our history, American sons and daughters have willingly laid down their lives to strengthen our nation and preserve its freedoms. Indeed, the greatest of this republic is founded in their selfless service.
Last night, thousands attended a concert on the lawn of the U.S. Capitol, as John mentioned, and just within the last hour, President Obama laid this wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. In Texas, many are preparing for another round of strong storms today. Officials say they continue to search for at least 12 missing people after a series of deadly storms hit that region. Several cities in Texas are claiming May as to be the wettest month on record. When it comes to fighting ISIS, Senator John McCain doesn't think much of the White House's strategy.
There is no strategy. And anybody that says that there is, I'd like to hear what it is, because it certainly isn't apparent.
McCain also chided the president for saying the biggest enemy we have is climate change.
Meantime, Defense Secretary Ashton Carter blasting the Iraqi army for the fall of Ramadi. Speaking to CNN, Carter said the Iraqi forces showed no will to fight. He says they vastly outnumbered the ISIS forces, and yet they still retreated. But an Iranian general disagrees with that. The leader of Iran's Revolutionary Guard in their foreign operations says the U.S. did nothing to help Iraq's army fight ISIS. He flipped around what Carter had to say, claiming the Americans were the ones with no will to fight ISIS. In fact, because the militants, quote, export their oil via countries belonging to the international coalition. Meantime, CNN's Jake Tapper criticizing people who run the Democratic Party's Twitter account. He slammed this message showing President Obama eating an ice cream cone, along with the message, quote, Happy Memorial Day weekend, everybody. Tapper, who has always supported veterans, tweeted this, quote, respectfully, this is not what Memorial Day weekend is about. Also important to note, too, Jake Tapper, throughout the course of this weekend, tweeting and retweeting folks who post stuff on Twitter about family members and loved ones who have died in combat or while serving the military.
It was nice of him to do that. Well, Jane Fonda and the cover of a fashion magazine just sparked a fiery debate right here on Newsmax TV.
That's right. Conservative columnist Larry Elder, also a constant guest here on Newsmax Now, and left-leaning Brad Bannon, who's been on the show too, fought over whether Hanoi Jane should have been featured on the cover of W magazine. Take a listen.
I can understand how they feel, though, because I felt the same way when George Bush was president and Dick Cheney was vice president. It drove me crazy to see them every Memorial Day at the Arlington National Monument. And here are two guys who did everything they could to avoid going to Vietnam, and were successful not going to Vietnam. But yet they every year honored our.
Now wait a minute,
fallen
Brad.
soldiers.
You're talking about people with constitutional duties. You may disagree with them politically, but to switch the focus off Jane Fonda, the bottom line is, after the diatribe about President Bush and Vice President Cheney, you understand the distress that some veterans have about Jane Fonda.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I do, and I have the same stress about George W. Bush and
All
Dick
right,
Cheney.
fine. That's duly noted. Larry Elder, your turn.
That's incredibly unfair. Incredibly unfair. George W. Bush did serve. Dick Cheney took deferments. They were legal deferments. Jane Fonda went over, consorted with the enemy at the height of the war. I have two brothers, my older brother and younger brother, who were Vietnam-era vets. It pissed them off. It pissed me off.
Well, I would argue at least Jane Fonda admitted she made a mistake. George W. Bush and Dick Cheney never admit they made a mistake.
You know,
Brad,
Brad,
mistake. George W. Bush served. Dick Cheney had deferments. They were lawful. What do you mean mistake? And I agree with you. I think the vets ought to forgive Jane Fonda. She's apologized not just once, but repeatedly. But don't tell me it wasn't a mistake, and don't tell me it wasn't a grave error that she ought to be responsible for the rest of her life.
Well, I disagree with you on that, Larry.
Well, disagreement duly noted.
Bringing up Dick Cheney, so incredibly unfair. Why is Dick Cheney such a hateful person to you? Please tell me that. Tell me that.
Because he sent 4,500 brave young Americans to their deaths by lying about the presence of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
Wow.
A lie that he lied about WMD. A, B, he was vice president. The commander-in-chief named George W. Bush is the one who made the decision, my friend.
Here's a clear distinction, Brad. There's a difference between misinterpreting intelligence and, quote, lying. Now, people can have policy disagreements.
Dick Cheney didn't misinterpret intelligence. He made it up. There was no evidence at all there were weapons.
Can you give me one specific example where Dick Cheney, quote, made it up? One example, please.
Oh, he made up the whole thing about WMDs. There weren't any.
Very heated exchange, as you just saw.
We see that. And also, the report out now that Bob Woodward, a famous investigative journalist from Watergate coverage, saying that no, the Bush administration did not lie. This was based on faulty intelligence and the fact that they thought they could win this war in a couple of weeks.
I still can't believe that when I hear that, though, that they thought they would win
think about
in
this,
a couple weeks.
We saw the video of Jane Fonda back there with the North Vietnamese in a gun turret, I believe. Think about today if a Hollywood actress went over to Syria and was seen in ISIS propaganda video cohorting with Islamic militants.
I think those are totally two different things.
I think they are two different
I
things.
understand.
The war
I
in
understand what you're
Vietnam
trying to
was
do.
so unpopular. If there's, we talk about repeating
But how
the
long
mistakes.
does she? And I'm not saying what she did was right. I'm not condoning that at all. But when you've apologized repeatedly.
No, my point is that this would not happen today. I do not think the American public would stand for it. If somebody did go over there and do that, they could not come back to this country. The point being that the prior generation, I think, learned from mistakes made during the Vietnam War. That being one of them.
But some are arguing we didn't learn enough mistakes, otherwise we wouldn't have been in the mess that we were in. I understand why he was saying that argument about Cheney. I do. I understand. I'm not saying I agree with it, but I understand why he feels that way. There are a lot of people that would say we should have never gone into Iraq.
There certainly are people.
And that we should have learned our lessons from Vietnam, that we shouldn't have gone in there. Whether that's right or wrong, I'm not the expert.
It is an argument, a debate that continues to play out on the presidential campaign trail. We'll see it play out even more.
We will.
Even though we can't go back in time and change what happened.
Right, which you were saying that you thought the focus is wrong, that we should not be talking about the past, why we went to war, why we didn't go to war, that we should focus on how are we going to deal with the current situation, and that is ISIS.
And I think that's a debate for college campuses and in history classes. We've got a real problem facing us in ISIS, and I think our fixation on what happened in 2003 is clouding our ability to properly deal with the situation.
Is it clouding, or should we reevaluate what we did there so we don't make the same mistakes again?
I think if we had not had the Iraq War, there would be no question about boots on the ground in Iraq, and you see that in the public opinion polls that we see today.
You think that's it, or I think it could also have something to do that we put a Shia leader in charge of a mostly Sunni country?
Well, the
that probably didn't help
Iraqi
matters
people
either.
elected him the leader of Iraq, not the American people. So that debate will continue to happen,
It will.
including here on this stage.